Corporation is a global mass media network with a diverse range of business functions, ranging from its news and information services segment to its digital real estate services and cable network programming functions. News Corporation is able to distribute its content to its consumers worldwide through print, digital and television platforms. The various companies associated with News Corporation include Dow Jones, Fox Sport, 21st Century Fox, The Sun and many, many more, amassing a total revenue of $32 billion annually. News Corporation was founded in 1979 by Executive Chairman Rupert Murdoch. Currently, the Murdoch family claims stake to over 40% of News Corporation shares, giving them a large controlling interest in the organisation. Notable decision makers include James Murdoch, who is the Deputy COO and CEO of the organisation, and Chase Carey, who is the CEO, COO and Deputy Chairman of the Board of Directors. Key governance failures which occurred at News Corporation that we'll be examining include the phone hacking scandal and the bribery of public officials instigated by members of the press. We will explore how employees of News Corporation ignored the standard of ethics of the newspaper industry and took part in these deliberate activities which led to these multiple governance failures. We will also consider the levels of control which should have and could have been put in place to prevent any of these failings from occurring in the first place and to prevent them from happening again.
The phone hacking scandal came to light after it was found that editors of the News of the World had authorised the hacking of various public figures' mobile phones. This includes members of the royal family, various celebrities, and high-profile public figures such as Millie Dowler. Members of the press that were involved included Clive Goodman, who was the previous royal editor of the News of the World, Andy Coulson, who was the former editor of the News of the World since 2003, Rebekah Brooks, former chief executive of News International, and during the scandal, the editor-in-chief of the News of the World, and Glenn McClare, who was a private investigator hired by Rebekah Brooks to hack the phones of individuals. Phones were hacked by knowing the specific model type that the user had. The mobile number would be rang on withheld in order to access the user's voicemails. They would then use a default factory set PIN number to access these voicemails. These PIN numbers would normally come with a specific phone model, which customers are encouraged to change, but rarely do. This enabled hackers to gain access to these voicemails and gather information for the purpose of a news story. The phone hacking scandal shows there was a clear lack of internal control systems in place to monitor compliance within the organisation. The editor's code of conduct states that the information obtained must be used in a manner that protects the rights of the individual and the public's right to know. However, members of the press deviated from the industry standard of ethics and obtained information using unethical means. Since there was no apparent controls set in place to monitor these activities, they went on without question and ultimately damaging the reputation of News Corp.
Included several Metropolitan Police officers, including April Casburn and Alan Tierney, a prison officer who provided information on a high-profile inmate, and a sergeant from Sandhurst Military Academy. The majority of bribes were paid out by News International or authorised by senior management higher up the business hierarchy. The main perpetrator was Rebekah Brooks. Her close relationship with officials such as politicians increased the risk of her receiving specialist treatment and the exchange of information that wouldn't have been given otherwise. This controlled governance failure was a result of the poor influences from those higher up the corporate hierarchy of News Corp. The apparent tone from the top filtered down the ranks and may have affected the top tier management's perception of the organisation's commitment to compliance, therefore leading to the illicit payment of bribes. A report from the Corporate Library, which is a research company dedicated to providing information on governance research and analysis, indicates that on a scale of grades A to F, News Corporation's corporate governance received a grade F from the years 2005 onwards. News Corporation in future should therefore pay attention to reports such as these in order to review their governance processes and procedures.
The main cause for the multiple governance failures which occurred within News Corporation News and Information Services segment was Murdoch's management of its corporate structure. Rupert Murdoch had designated himself both dual roles of CEO and chairman during the events of the scandal. This meant that any strategies that were put in place by him were made accountable to himself without question or challenge. His overwhelming influence over the board of directors and large controlling stake in the company meant that if anything went wrong, he wouldn't be blamed internally and that his position would still be secure. The lack of reviews, monitoring systems, and general attitude towards compliance may have filtered down the ranks and ultimately directed the way that employees such as Andy Coulson, Rebecca Brooks, and Clive Goodman perceived the compliance procedures within the press industry. Therefore, there should have been a clear separation of duties of Rupert Murdoch's roles, allowing for the better management of internal control systems to monitor any deviant activities within News Corporation and its subsidiary companies. There was also a lack of independence within the board of directors, with many executive directors having strong ties to Rupert Murdoch. For example, Rob Eddington, former BA chief executive and longtime friend of Rupert Murdoch. Also, John Thornton, the former Goldman Sachs president, who worked with News Corporation on a number of major deals. Natalie Bancroft, an opera singer whose family decided to sell Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal to the Murdoch family. And Viet Din, who is godfather to Lancelyn Murdoch, the eldest of Murdoch's children. Therefore, in order to create a board which effectively manages the corporate credibility, governance and risk management systems within News Corporation in a fair and open way, there should be a separate remuneration selection committee which chooses the executive and non-executive directors of the board, without the intervention of Rupert Murdoch. An internal control system that News Corporation should have used is the PDC control model. This model could have been adapted for the use of regulating press standards by directing any undesirable events in 3 separate control categories, which are preventative, detective, and corrective controls. Preventative controls are the first line of defense in any organization against the frequency of the occurrence of undesirable events. What News Corporation could have done was to provide a source document detailing the main principles of the editor's code of practice to its employees on a regular basis, being presented through floor meetings or regular engagements. This would have acted as an initial deterrent against any unethical behavior en route to obtaining information for the purpose of a news story. The second line of defense, known as detective controls, includes devices and techniques that are designed to identify and expose activities that elude the initial screening or preventative measures. Examples of detective techniques include the monitoring of internal and external emails using a random sample of employees regardless of position throughout different periods of the year. Another useful detective control would be the review of the methods of obtaining information for the purpose of a news story by an independent panel of investigators. This panel can determine whether the information obtained from private investigators, reporters, or journalists went against anti-corruption or anti-compliance procedures. The third and final control system is known as the corrective controls. It's used to fix any problems that have been detected. Any undesirable detected event should lead to the organisation taking action, either by issuing warnings, sackings, or even involving the authorities. In light of the findings from the inquiry by Lord Justice Leveson, the following 3 options are most suitable: independent regulation, judicial regulation, and statutory regulation. This is Kajeevan Manak, reporting for Birmingham University. Thank you and goodbye.